Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Perpetual Chess bonus pod. We've got some huge chess events on the horizon, including a Hans-Magnus much-anticipated rematch. And I'm super excited for this match. I know some people feel a little queasy about the drama, but I'm here for it. And also here for it is longtime friend of the pod, Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Welcome back, Ben.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me back, Ben. I like being on the podcast.
And of course, we enjoy having you, and we will have you again to do a postmortem and to talk about your forthcoming Chessable course, probably sometime later in September. But for now, we got to talk about this match. But first, did want to thank our sponsors, Chessable.com. My course is out. It's called Identifying Critical Moments in Chess. Ben, it's about how I can stop thinking for like 25 minutes on move 8. I think you're not supposed to do that. It's about the slow process of learning that. So primary target audience is about 1,000 to 1,500, but I think it can also be helpful for trainers. So check that out as well as all their other stuff. So Ben, as we record this, Hans has been on a tear. He's in match play in different formats. He's beaten MVL and Wesley So in the Speed Chess Championships. And then in the Traveling Hans Circus, where he plays all these top players, I mean, he's beaten Geary, he's beaten Back-Crow, he's beaten Vidit, he's beaten Vichigov. So, of course, my question for you, Ben, is can he beat Magnus Carlsen in the Speed Chess Championship on September 6th in Paris?
Well, the answer is maybe, but it's unlikely that he'll win the match. Can he win the match? I guess it's possible based on his recent results. It seemed like for about a year, Hans wasn't going anywhere. And in fact, probably when he got over 2,700 for the first time, his results suffered and he went down a little bit. But as you pointed out, in 2024, he's absolutely killing it. He's top 20 in the world now. He's beating everybody in these blitz and rapid matches, and even some slow chess. So he's playing the best chess he's ever played. But I mean, Magnus is Magnus. So if you ask me, will player A beat Magnus? Then the answer is no. So nothing against Hans. But you know, beating Magnus is different than beating the other players that you mentioned. And it would be a shocking upset if Hans won, but I would have told you 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, that it's virtually impossible, but based on recent results, it's not impossible anymore.
Sounds about right. And the format, I'm sure a lot of you have been watching the build-up for the Speed Chess Championship, but just in case you haven't, so again, this will be live in Paris. There's 90 minutes of 5-1 blitz, 5 minutes with a 1 second increment, followed by 60 minutes of 3-1 blitz, and then 30 minutes of 1-1 bullet. And these are they're playing in person, but they have computers. They call it battleship style, sitting opposite.
Which I think is very strange, but I heard that also.
Yeah. I kind of like it. I mean, you know, they're leaning into the esport thing. It differentiates it from other chess competitions. And the main thing is since bullet's involved, like you cannot, online blitz maybe, but you cannot call online bullet and IRL bullet the same thing. Because once you have pieces getting knocked over and stuff, it just becomes a totally different game. So Hikaru said that he thinks that Magnus is a massive favorite. He said he thinks he has a 95% chance at least of winning. And the point he particularly highlighted, Ben, was that Magnus is a massive favorite in the bullet portion. Do you agree that that's where one player has the greatest advantage?
I think Magnus has advantage in all formats. But yeah, Magnus is a killer in bullet. And I don't know if I agree that that's where he's the biggest favorite. But I mean, it's possible. He's a favorite in all the formats. And I think typically what Hikaru probably meant was in these kinds of matches where it's Hans versus anybody, you know, who's top 20, 30, 40 in the world, probably Hans's biggest advantage is in bullet. And that's simply not true with Magnus. So I think Hans being a favorite in bullet against like Back-Crow and Vichigov it's not going to be like that against Magnus. So, when Hans was playing those other matches with Geary and So and MVL and such, probably Hans was looking forward to the bullet. He's like, well, maybe I won't win the blitz, but I'll certainly do well in bullet. And I think he can't think that way against Magnus. So Magnus is a better bullet player than the previous players he played. He's a better bullet player than Hans, and he's clearly the favorite in all the formats and in bullet as well.
Yeah. I know Geary was pretty impressed with Hans. He said what surprised him most was the level of play that Hans exhibited, and he said it's hard to accept when he proves you wrong over the board. But it sounds like...
No, it was clear that Hans totally outplayed Geary that match, and he was a deserved winner.
I mean, that's amazing.
Geary seems like he's lost confidence this year. He seems like he's having a bad year. And I think losing to Hans and the way he lost to Hans, where he just got outplayed, seems like not going to be good for his confidence.
So Hans is in one of these situations that you often see with young players where it seems like maybe their rating hasn't caught up with some sort of strength leap because, I mean, he's just running roughshod through everyone he plays and skyrocketing up the charts, although, as you say, still a long way from Magnus. But do you have a sense of like where he could land, where he might consolidate again and slow down now that he's cracked the top 20 in classical chess?
Yeah, I don't know. Because we've seen this before, and people who are in their late teens and early 20s have been super impressive over a period of time. And I'm thinking of like Iragasi and Gukesh and Pragnanandha and Abdu Satorov and Vincent Kamer, maybe some others. But, sometimes all of a sudden they're not as impressive as they were. And somebody like Ding, who won the world championship, hasn't been impressive since. Somebody like Gukesh, who won the candidates, hasn't been as impressive since. Somebody like Pragnanandha, who ran up to top 20 in the world and was just playing amazing chess, hasn't been impressive for several months. So there's an ebb and flow, and people have good days and bad days. It's possible Hans will keep getting better, and he'll be, one of the clear favorites if he makes the next candidates. And it's also possible that he has a bad stretch and the next 6 months to a year, nothing much happens, or maybe he loses rating. We don't really know. And I think more than most people, Hans is pretty driven, and he has a team of people he works with. And even though he complains he doesn't get invites and he doesn't play the top players, I mean, he's making his own tournaments where he's playing top players. So I think a lot of people in Hans's rating range, like 2680 to 2750, they wish they got more invitations to Super GM tournaments with the top 10, 20 players in the world. And there's several players around Hans' rating who aren't complaining, but still don't get those invitations to the, like the Sinquefield Cup and Tata Steel and tournaments of that ilk. Hans has played in a lot of top events, and it's unclear what will happen if Hans plays in a tournament that's slow chess, that he's not one of the top 5 or 6 players, where he's one of the lowest rated players, since we haven't seen that in a while. And the other thing is, the way chess is going, unlike when we were playing chess competitively at our peak, it seems like a lot of the top players don't really care about slow chess as much as they used to. And a lot of the big tournaments are blitz, bullet, and rapid. And that's just Hans's game. So maybe it doesn't matter if he plays slow chess against the top 10 players in the world if he's dominating on the quicker side of chess, which, I mean, a lot of the fans think is even better. So,
yeah. And we should mention, by the way, of course, the other half of the Final Four also to be contested in Paris on September 6th is Nakamura.
No slouches.
Nakamura Firouzja. Yeah, that one should be a banger too.
Also, Nakamura Firouzja playing second fiddle. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, that should be incredible theater as well. But of course, what makes the Magnus Hans match so compelling? Obviously, the first time they'll be sitting across from each other that we know of, certainly playing each other since the infamous Sinquefield Cup match. But all of the sort of vitriol and bad will that is still in evidence as seen in Hans's post game interview after he beat Wesley. So I assume you watched that interview, Ben.
Yeah, that was very fun watching. Little acerbic there from Hans, but he said what he wanted to say, and we know where he stands. And again, a lot of people believe he's playing the villain and doing a good job of it, but I'm not sure if he's acting. It seems like he believes a lot of what he says. Sort of like, when McEnroe complained a lot, wasn't necessarily doing it for theater. He believed in his complaints, and he believed he was being treated unjustly at certain points. And I think Hans feels the same way too. And in some of the stuff Hans says, I agree, and some I don't agree as much. And even in our household here, Karen and I don't agree on the Hans situation. And I'm talking about the Hans situation from before the Magnus stuff, where I know Hans personally, so does Karen, and our judgment and viewpoints on him are different. She's a big Hans fan, and she thinks he can beat Magnus. And when you asked me to do this interview a few weeks ago, I was going to tell you he had no chance. But since he keeps winning, I guess he does have a chance. So it seems like Hans has improved a lot in the last 6 months. And based on what I'm seeing, I can't say the same thing over the last few years about Magnus. Magnus is still the best, but I'll take 5 years ago Magnus over current day Magnus. I think Magnus was a better player 5 years ago, and that still doesn't mean he's not the best player in the world now.
Yeah, for the record, I think Hans has a chance too, and even the 95% that Hikaru suggested, I would put that a bit high. I think Hans, especially because there's obviously a lot of emotions involved. I mean, obviously to achieve what Magnus has, you have to develop some skill in setting your emotions aside. But whatever happened in Sinquefield Cup, he obviously seemed uniquely triggered. And, subsequently in the Chess 24 online event where he refused to play him, and then even sitting out in the recent team event to avoid playing him, suggests to me that whatever it is that bothered Magnus isn't completely gone. And obviously, when Hans is issuing quotes like, this is a quote about Carlsen, I think he is a sick, deluded person who wanted to destroy my life. And he did this just out of pure vendetta. So when you hear a quote like that, as you say, it's safe to say that they've not buried the hatchet.
No, and I have a question for you, which is probably a first on Perpetual podcast, being asked a question. Do you think there's some percentage chance that Magnus just won't play?
So there was some speculation before his semifinal match. Maybe he'll tank it. So that certainly was my thought going in. I thought there's a decent chance he's going to avoid him in some way. But given what he said, the matter-of-fact interview where he said he reviewed the match and Hans played well, but he wasn't overly impressed. And here's the verbatim money quote. He says, he's playing quite well. I think if I have a decent day, I'll probably win without too many issues. So that struck me as such like classic Magnus. He praises him and he buries him, at the same time. And it's so matter of fact, that's his hallmark, is he really sort of cuts through the fat and tells you what he really thinks about any match, whether it be a world championship or about this one. So the fact that he was not as emotional in the build up to that makes me think it's very unlikely that he doesn't show up, but never say never.
Right. And I think over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've come to the conclusion that Magnus is definitely going to show up and we're going to see a match. And I don't know if it's 95%, but it's probably in the 90s that Magnus will win the match.
Yeah, I might go for 90. And I'm not I haven't watched all of the Speed Chess Championships. So I can't say I'm the world's biggest expert in terms of handicapping this particular match. But as you say, you can sort of draw general conclusions about the classic trajectory of the up-and-coming player who's rising quickly against the sort of superstar whose best days, let's face it, are at least a little bit behind him. But Magnus was so much better than everyone that that he'll probably manage to win if he can control his emotions, which he's had years of practice doing. So are you going to be covering the match, Ben?
Actually, as you may know, the match is on my birthday, and I think I have a chess lesson scheduled during the match.
Oh, wow.
So I'll follow the match, but I think there'll be so much coverage of the match on, chess.com and Hikaru that probably very few people would watch my coverage. But I don't know what time of day it's going to be. I'll talk about it with Karen, but it seems more likely that I should be watching the coverage by the best players instead of doing my own coverage, which I don't think would get a lot of viewers, but maybe it would. So I'll consider it. I'll keep it under my hat, but I do plan on watching it.
Okay. Yeah, I know the first match is at 9 a.m. New York time, 4 p.m. Paris time, but I wasn't able to definitively determine which match comes first out of Firouzja Nakamura and the Magnus Hans match. And Ben, circling back to what you said about there were some things Hans said in that interview that you agreed with and others you disagreed with. Let's hear it. So what did you agree with versus disagree?
Well, some of the stuff he said about cheating, I don't necessarily agree with, because I think he's cheated more than he's let on. And he sort of said things that didn't make sense during the interview. Like, I've never cheated in a money event, except I did cheat in a money event, but prize was only $100, so that doesn't matter. I mean, what he said didn't make a lot of sense. He was saying a lot of stuff. And I guess from like Karen's point of view, he did cheat online when he was, somewhere between 11 and 15 years old. Maybe he did it a lot. And I mean, she's forgiving him for that because he was a minor. He's not 13 years old anymore. And it's unclear to me whether he's cheated since that. He's denied it. And I think, in my opinion, Magnus withdrawing from the Sinquefield Cup and, basically accusing Hans of cheating that game, that didn't happen. And just because somebody has cheated online at some point in their career, especially if they're a little kid, doesn't mean they're cheating in the Sinquefield Cup. And unfortunately, as we all know too well, but maybe the general public doesn't, a lot of very famous, high-rated, strong GMs have cheated online.
Yeah.
And probably more than the general public knows. But there's some people who are admitted cheaters and they got their accounts back and Magnus plays them. So I don't know. It seems like there is a little personal animus against Hans, and maybe Carlsen knows more about what's going on behind the scenes and the amount or extent of Hans cheating he believes to have happened more than Hans will admit. And in my opinion, this doesn't mean much, but I'm the one on the podcast. I don't think Hans has cheated in slow chess. It's possible, but I don't think he has. And I'm sure in the last 2 or 3 years, he hasn't cheated on the internet either. Whether he cheated more than he said he did when he was a preteen and a teenager, I mean, my opinion, which again doesn't mean anything, I think he's cheated more than he said. And whether he cheated between the ages of 16 and 20, I just don't know. And it seems to me, if we believe Hans and his cheating was not very much, not in money tournaments, when he was between 12 and 15 years old, then if that's all true, then Magnus' behavior doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of people who cheated on the internet when they were kids and they stopped. So basically there seems to be a disagreement among how much Hans cheated and whether he cheated and how much he cheated and what ages he cheated. And Hans tells one story, and I think Magnus believes another story. And I think they're both being ingenuous. That's the way they look at it. I don't think Magnus woke up one day and said, it's time for a vendetta against Hans.
Right.
And I think he believes Hans has cheated too much or possibly against him. And I don't believe that Hans ever cheated over the board. And I definitely don't think Hans cheated in that Sinquefield Cup game. And I don't know a lot of grandmasters who think he did, just based on the moves of the game and the way the game was played. And I think in the back of Magnus's head, Hans might cheat that game. In the back of his head, he lost the game with white when Magnus hadn't lost in like a million games in a row. So in his mind, he was like, maybe my opponent's going to cheat this game. Aha, he's beating me with black. So he did cheat this game. And I think that Magnus believed that. I don't know what Magnus believes now, but both sides went a little too far in what they say and what they think. And that's causing a lot of animosity in the chess world. And hopefully you won't cut this too much because I'm talking a lot. But a lot of people, unfortunately, talk about this anal beads thing, which is a joke.
Right.
And it's not serious. And the people who invented it were kidding. And I think some percentage of people, maybe 20 to 30%, think that Hans has cheated with anal beads when it's just a joke. Nobody's ever cheated with anal beads. And some people say this as a joke, and some people are serious. And some people call Hans a cheater as if he's still cheating and he's always been cheating, when in fact, there's many players around Hans's rating, grandmasters, super grandmasters, who have cheated online as much or more than Hans has, maybe a long time ago, but it's not an ongoing thing. And sometimes people make a mistake in life and they cheat and then they stop. They don't cheat for 10 years in a row. That's not typically what a grandmaster or super grandmaster is doing. And Karen gives Hans the benefit of the doubt, thinks that he did cheat when he was a kid. He was a minor. It was years ago. It's not relevant to what's happening now. So we should move on. And I'm sort of moving into Karen's way of thinking, but I still think he's cheated more than he said he has, but I think it's been many years, and I think it's time to move on.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything you said, and just want to highlight a few points for listeners that may not have caught all these details of this crazy, never-ending story. Number one, Magnus, in his statement also, when I interviewed Eric Albest, CEO of Chess.com, he mentioned that there's a forthcoming Netflix documentary about this. And Magnus did say that he shared more of his thoughts in that documentary, because Magnus has been so tight-lipped about this whole thing. It would be nice to hear anything about what the grounds for his suspicion were beyond Hans's track record. Number two, in reviewing the Niemann Speed Chess Championship match, I saw some of the YouTube comments, and people were saying Hans's eyes were still darting all over the place during the match as if he was still cheating, but just want to reinforce the point that there were proctors at the match from chess.com. So any idea that he's still cheating, like with two proctors in the room, I think is just too cloak and dagger.
If Hans has cheated on the internet, it hasn't been in the last few years.
Yeah, I agree.
Last 2, 3, 4 years, Hans hasn't been cheating on the internet or in real life. If he was cheating even more than he said he was, it was between the ages of 10 and 16.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much he cheated, but it's been years and years, if Hans did cheat, that he's cheated. And we got to move on. That's not happening now. And it's basically just silly. It's just something to talk about and get views and get content, but it's not something that's happening.
Yeah. And the prizes, if you win the final, is guaranteed $35,000 for the winner, $17,500 for the runner-up, and then there's an additional amount split by win percentage. By the way, Ben, with the aforementioned Hans tour, do you know where the prize money is coming from for these matches?
No, I don't know who the sponsor is. That Karen asked me that a little while ago. I don't know who's sponsoring those matches. However, I do know on Twitter yesterday, Hans posted, if anybody wants to sponsor my match with Carlsen, doesn't make a lot of sense, then his DMs are open. So he's looking for sponsors for his match with Magnus where he's already getting paid, but I guess he wants to get paid more.
Yeah, that's mystifying for sure. One of the many mysterious things that makes this all the more compelling. One last point to highlight as we wrap up. So a lot of people expressed surprise that they showed this interview where Hans is attacking chess.com on chess.com after the match. And it is it does seem to be a bit lost on Hans that yes, they denied him some opportunities before, but this and other opportunities they now are granting him. So Daniel Rensch, chief chess officer at chess.com, issued a statement in response to all the stuff Hans said in the interview. So I just want to read his response. This is from August 8th, and I'll link to it and any other relevant stuff. He said, we stand 100% by the findings in our report. This includes both that we found no evidence of you cheating over the board, but also that you cheated more online than you continue to present. Ken Regan agreed with these conclusions. Regarding my saying that you did not cheat while streaming, he says, I just said that because I had no desire to reveal the specific details and you had already confessed to cheating. He goes on to say, nobody colluded to blackball you. There's no conspiracy theory. There was only deep concern about a kid who had a known history of cheating and who then beat the world chess champion and couldn't explain it on camera. We uninvited you to the Global Chess Championship because we thought it was the best thing to do at the time. We honestly regret how we handled that, and for that, I personally apologize. We're sorry for the negativity you've been subjected to in the press. It's very hard for a young person. That said, it was your choice to go public about the retracted invitation, and goes on to say good luck in the tournament. So slightly abridged version of Daniel's response, which people can see in full. What did you think of that response, Ben?
Well, it's very strange, and it doesn't look good that when he beats Magnus in the Sinquefield Cup and Magnus withdraws and leaves, which I think is very poor behavior, that at that point, when chess.com was buying Play Magnus, and they were merging and Magnus was part of the chess.com team, that all of a sudden Hans seems to be persona non grata with chess.com. So it's hard to believe everything Danny said. And I think in some instances, even if it's not true, the people make themselves believe it is true. And you can make yourself believe that things you know are untrue or true, which is a weird thing to say. But I think in Danny Rensch's case, that's happened more than once. And I think he believes that they've done nothing with ill will towards Hans. They didn't collude with Magnus and do stuff, but it just looks like they did because of the timing of everything. And it's very strange timing that when Magnus is clearly upset with Hans, that chess.com takes these actions based on things that happened years ago. So it's very strange. And I can see why Hans feels like he's being persecuted. And basically, a lot of what's happening to Hans, he brought on himself. His behavior has always been very bad, even before he was a famous person. At chess camps and at tournaments, he's known to be very badly behaved and do things he shouldn't do. And it's been exacerbated by the alleged cheating and the amount of cheating. And he thinks he's been punished too harshly, but he's not a choir boy. And I think everybody's a little at fault here. Everybody's overreacted a little. And I don't understand why he was disinvited from a tournament right after he beat Magnus and there was no cheating in that game. That's just very strange timing. So it's hard to know who to believe and if people are genuinely thinking they're telling the truth. But chess.com's statement, Danny's statement about, we did this because we felt it was in the best interest. I mean, they did it because Magnus got mad at Hans and wanted retribution. That's the way I look at it, even if chess.com denies that. So in that instance, I agree somewhat with Hans that he hasn't been treated the most proper way. And the reason he hasn't been treated the most proper way, a lot of it is because of his behavior. So he behaved badly, and maybe he got punished or treated worse than his behavior should have been, but maybe not. I don't know the extent of everything, but it seems like there's a lot of bad actions here by people who aren't necessarily bad actors.
Yeah, the original sins all fall with Hans. Yeah, and I've talked before about the banning of Hans from chess.com during the Sinquefield Cup, and yeah, it's just they had incomplete information. There was a wide sense at the time that there was like another shoe to drop, and I think they didn't want to get caught with him still in the tournament. So I believe, Danny, in this case that they made an honest mistake, but as you say, the optics are terrible. And certainly have contributed to this fractured relationship. Now, as we wrap up, Ben, let's talk about a little actual chess. So the Wesley So Hans match, obviously Magnus's openings are extremely unpredictable. The Wesley So match was a lot of Italians, Roy Lopez's. Any bold opening predictions? Do you think they'll switch around a lot or stick with similar repertoires?
Yeah, I don't think Magnus likes to stick with the same stuff. I don't think Hans really cares either. He'll play everything. So I think we're going to see a lot of varied openings. We're going to see some strategical, positional games, and we'll see some crazy tactical games. We're going to see a lot of time trouble, and I think we're going to see streaks. And I wouldn't be surprised if, at some point Hans wins 3 games in a row, or if Magnus wins even more games in a row. And basically, there's 2 outcomes that seem reasonable. Magnus wins comfortably, maybe by 5 or 6 points, or Magnus totally rolls over Hans and wins by 12, 13 points, which I think he already did in this tournament. I think he beats, I don't know who it was Vidit maybe. He beat somebody by a ridiculous score. So I think either one of those is possible. And I think it's going to be an interesting match. And it's happening on my birthday, which the players obviously argued they should play on my birthday. Because basically Magnus and Hans were always thinking of me. And so good decision by them, and can't wait to see the match.
Yeah, it should be fun. And Hans, of course, tweeted the entire thing started in a chess game and it should end on a chessboard. My only comment is, I, of course, don't think this will be the end. Certainly, especially if Magnus wins, as we think is more likely than not. Hopefully there'll be more matches in the future. And hopefully Hans can continue his ascent because it's great theater. But Ben, so we'll have you back, catch up on this and the Olympiad and your course and all that other stuff. But thanks as always for popping in.
Thanks for having me on, Ben.
And happy birthday in advance, September 6th. Everyone tune in and pop into Ben's Twitch while you're at it and wish him a happy birthday. Take care.
Thank you. See you, Ben.